This is a very difficult topic to present on today, because I think probably everyone in this room has as much information as I have, if not more, because in particular the Iranian community has been watching this, the developments of what started as HR 158 since probably December. And although I'm not on Facebook or any of the social media networks, I do email, and I got so many emails about HR 158, so I can just imagine what was going out on Facebook and Twitter and everything else. But there was a lot of discussion about the changes in the Visa Waiver Program. So I think what I'm going to do is go through a presentation, just mostly covering things that you may or may not already know. And I think the most interesting part of this presentation will come through the questions and answers. I know people have lots of questions about how this is going to be implemented, HR 158. For ease of presentation, instead of referring to it as, I think it came out as part of the 2016, what was it called? It started out as HR 158, and it ultimately became incorporated into the 2016 emergent government funding, which is a huge piece of legislation that Obama signed into law December the 18th, and it was effective immediately on signing. Implementation was delayed. So we'll go through the background of HR 158. I'm just going to call it that, even though it has a new name since what's going on here. Okay. HR 158, the details. Basically, the most important things to remember about it, and you already know, is that it restricts the entry of individuals under the Visa Waiver Program who have been to Iran, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, and other countries designated as state sponsors of terrorism and countries of concern. So it's vague there. What other countries could be designated, there is a 60-day period during which the Secretary of State is supposed to designate, if they're going to designate additional countries that will be excluded from the program, they're supposed to do it during that time. And then strictly, this is the most restrictive part, the most discriminatory part of the legislation. It excludes from the Visa Waiver Program nationals of Iran, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, and other countries of concern. So they specifically set out those 4 countries as no longer being able to participate in the Visa Waiver Program if they were already eligible to participate in the Visa Waiver Program. There are some exemptions. Exempted from this new legislation are people performing military service in the armed forces of a Visa Waiver Program country, say Germany or France or Spain or the United States, that was in Iran, Syria, Iraq, Sudan during this period of time. Actually, I noticed that there should be on the restriction number 1 that applies to all people who are subject to the Visa Waiver Program who visited Iraq, Syria, Sudan, and Iran since March the 1st, 2011. So there is a time fixed to that section. So in other words, let's say any Iranian who, well, Iranians, we're not going to talk about Iranians, which are separate, they're excluded entirely. But like a Japanese business person who went to Iran after May 1st, after March the 1st, 2011, is no longer eligible for participation in the Visa Waiver Program. Or someone from France who's not Iranian, who's not Syrian, who's not Iraqi, and who's not Sudanese, who went to one of those countries for business or for business purposes after March the 1st, 2011, is no longer eligible for using the Visa Waiver Program. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, also has authority to exempt certain people from participating in the program. Visa Waiver Program generally allows citizens of 38 countries to travel to the United States without a visa. The people that are in the program are primarily from Europe, Japan, South Korea, and the United States. The program, the Visa Waiver Program, on its face is actually pretty discriminatory. If you look, these are the countries, the 38 countries that participate in the Visa Waiver Program. If you go through it, there's only I think one country from South America, no countries from Central America, no Arab countries, no very few African countries, if any. So they're mostly European countries. And this is a reciprocal agreement. In other words, Americans or people with U.S. nationality can travel to one of these 38 countries without obtaining a visa. The Visa Waiver Program, has a lot of preconditions and limitations. You're only allowed to stay 90 days. It's not a visa. You can't change your status, extend your status. The only thing you could do is if you travel to Mexico or Canada, a contiguous country, you could come back in and use what's remains of your original 90 days. So like if you go to Canada on day number 80, you would have 10 days left that you could return back to the United States, or 10 more days that you could stay in the United States. And people that are using the program, participants in the program, have to present a machine-readable passport, possess round-trip tickets, and they have to, since March of, since 2009, have to apply with ESTA to travel to the United States before you could come in under the Visa Waiver Program. The ESTA program is the electronic system for travel, and it's mandatory, but you could do that at the airport as well. They recommended that you go online and do your application 72 hours ahead of time, but if you forgot to do that, you were allowed to do that pretty much in the airport. The thing to remember about Visa Waiver, it's not a visa, it only allows you to enter the country. You can, if you enter on the Visa Waiver Program, you can adjust your status if you marry a U.S. citizen. Or you can apply for asylum as well. But those are the only two kind of exceptions to the 90-day rule. And eligible for change of status or extension of status, except the two exceptions that I've noted. Participants under the program had no right to a deportation proceeding. I think maybe some of you will remember 2001 when they rounded up a lot of Iranians in the Los Angeles area. People were here on the Visa Waiver Program, and they were not allowed to have a hearing. They just sent them back to the country where they had come from. And if you overstay the Visa Waiver Program, then your ability to enter the country in that same status in the future is supposed to be limited. I don't know whether it has been or not. I've seen a lot of people overstay their entry, but it hasn't been a problem, but that's in the past. All of this is changing. All right, so we already covered the change of status to lawful permanent resident if you marry a U.S. citizen after entry. One thing I wanted to note, there were a lot of questions about, well, when did Iran get added to this? There is a provision in the original legislation that started out in H.R. 158 where Iran was designated as a country that's a state sponsor of terrorism, and that happened on January the 19th, 1984. Syria was designated December the 29th, 1979, and Sudan in also 79. So these go back, and if you've been designated under either the Export Administration Act, the Arms Export Control Act, or the Foreign Assistance Act as a country that sponsors terrorism, then that's how they added those, even though in the legislation the only countries that were specifically named were Iraq and Syria, and then those that are subject, that have been designated under those other laws previously. I don't know if that's where it came from. So this is probably the most, what everybody wants to know is, how is this going to impact you and others that you know? If you're a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States, at this point, there's no impact unless the Visa Waiver Program countries, the other countries, the reciprocal countries, adopt similar laws. So far, I haven't heard of that happening. There has been, some warning that maybe they will also start implementing this. Certainly, it's conceivable that Germany and France will adopt the same sort of restrictions, but we don't know at this time. Iranian, Syrian, Iraqi, Sudanese have never been eligible, that do not hold dual nationality, have never been eligible anyway for using the Visa Waiver Program, so they'll still need to go to the consulate and apply for visas. Any kind of visas, a tourist visa, student visa, immigrant and non-immigrant visas. But we're talking about basically non-immigrant visas at this point. But people who do not hold dual nationality, who are Iranians, Syrians, Iraqi, or Sudanese, are not affected by these changes because they were not eligible to use the program in the beginning. The people that will be affected are Iranian, Syrian, Iraqi, Sudanese, who are dual nationals of Visa Waiver Programs. They must now obtain a visa prior to entering the United States. They are now no longer included in the Visa Waiver Program. And some people have valid ESTA approvals. However, they're going to be notified that those are being revoked and that they need to go over and apply for a visa to enter. People will not be allowed to enter using dual nationals who are dual nationals of Iran, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, will not be admitted under the Visa Waiver Program. They'll be turned back either at pre-inspection or in the airport, say in San Francisco, if you don't go through pre-inspection. So if you know anyone traveling to the United States who's coming from Europe, they need to make sure that they go apply for a visa before they come. That means they could lose their tickets, they could lose a lot of things because they've already made these arrangements and paid for those arrangements. However, the State Department has said that they're going to try and expedite processing of those cases for visas at the consulate for people who had ESTAs in the past. Visa Waiver Program nationals such as Japanese or Swiss who travel to Iran, Syria, Sudan, or Iraq since March the 1st, 2011, they must also now obtain a visa to enter the United States and can no longer use the program. And their applications for business visas, B1, B2s, will be expedited at the consulate once they apply, is what is being said. They're supposed to be hiring new people to process these or shift people around into the consulates to take care of what's going to be probably a pretty overwhelming number of people, because a lot of people have been going to Iran. We're just talking about Iran here, or Iraq as well during this period of time, doing business with the countries in one way or the other. So it will be it will create a serious impact on these consulates. So they are shifting people over into these positions. Yet there's lots of unknowns at this time. The changes were implemented on the 21st. That's when they started excluding people, revoking ESTAs. It was signed into law the 18th of December, but it wasn't actually implemented by DHS and the Customs and Border Protection people in the airports and in pre-inspections until the 21st of January. So now it's definitely in effect, and so you need to make sure that you inform anyone who's planning to travel that they need to apply for a visa if they're coming under the Visa Waiver Program. The question is, will these discriminatory visa waiver restrictions be removed? I think there is a push now to remove the second part of the law, the one that applies only to Iranians, Syrians, Sudanese, and Iraqis, where they're specifically named as no longer being able to participate in the program if they're dual nationals. It's not going to eliminate the first part, where if anyone of a participant in the program went to Iran, Iraq, Syria, Sudan since March the 1st, 2011, they'll still have to go through getting a visa. The Equal Protection and Travel Action of 2016, EPTA, was introduced, I think, in January. It was also introduced by another Republican from Michigan. The original H.R. 158 was introduced by a Republican from Michigan, Candace Miller, who has a history of being extremely anti-immigrant and very pro-Israel. So she introduced this piece of legislation way back in January 2015, before Paris and before San Bernardino. So the purpose of it was to try and create tensions with Iran to interfere with the negotiations of the nuclear issues and the lifting of sanctions. So it's been around for some time. It started not as there was a lot of media around, well, it's being implemented or rushed through now after San Bernardino and Paris, but in fact it was already circulating around since early January, and came out of the office of Candace Miller. One really interesting thing about this law is how nationality is going to be determined and where it's going to be determined. So I think what's going to happen is when you apply for ESTA, if you feel that you are not a national of Iran, say for example, you have someone who is born in England and their mother is Iranian, their father is British. And this particular woman has never been to Iran, and she's never obtained an Iranian passport. According to Iranian law, she may not be an Iranian national. So there's a whole argument about whether or not she's a national at all and whether she would be excluded from the program. And I don't know who's going to be making that determination. It appears that when you apply for ESTA approval, that they would determine it then, or when you apply for, I suppose, if you're applying for a visa, you've pretty much conceded that you're no longer eligible for the program. So I don't know, but nationality is a very interesting issue because nationality is determined by the country where you were born. And this is kind of a summary of some of the Iranian law that discusses nationality, and it's very gendered. If you're born of an Iranian father, then you're definitely an Iranian national. If you're born of an Iranian mother but not an Iranian father, there is a question about whether or not you whether you have your nationality. There are some steps, affirmative steps, you have to take if you were born outside the country to make sure that you preserve your Iranian nationality. People born in Iran of unknown parentage, they acquire Iranian nationality at birth. Even a foreign woman who marries an Iranian acquires Iranian nationality. So these changes to the Visa Waiver Program were implemented January the 21st. And this is basically what it means, that Visa Waiver Program is no longer eligible. The same to nationals of Visa Waiver Program countries who have traveled to or been in Iraq, Iran, Sudan, or Syria since March the 1st, 2011. And nationals of Visa Waiver Program countries who are nationals of Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Syria, are no longer eligible for the program at all if they're dual nationals of the country. Let's see. And they stress that nationals, dual nationals, will still be eligible to come to the United States, but you have to apply for a visa, which is a complicated procedure. It takes time, money, and so it's an inconvenience and it's really going to hamper international travel for anyone who's been to Iran during that period of time. And that's not going to change. Any of the dual nationals from those 38 countries, that part of the law is probably not going to change, and it's going to be around for at least a year, it looks like. After a year, it may morph into something else, but at this time, it seems like it's pretty much set in stone. And it's even if the fix that some of the civil rights organizations are signing on to is adopted, it's still going to mean that if you've been in Iran since March the 1st, you still will not be able to use the program, regardless of whether you're Iranian, Iraqi, Syrian, or Sudanese. And then these are the categories where they're going to allow waivers. And it's a very limited group. These are people who have traveled to the 4 countries on behalf of international organizations like the United Nations or Red Cross or an official recognized international organization, and that has a definition in law that set up which ones. And so it's like if Omid Advocates is not going to be one or something like that, you know. They're organizations such as the United Nations. Regional, if you've traveled for regional organizations or subnational governments and official business, you'll be waived in. Individuals who travel to Iran, Iraq, Sudan, or Syria on behalf of humanitarian NGOs or on official duty. So that would be like Doctors Without Borders or organizations like that. And also, this one's good, is individuals who travel to Iran, Iraq, Sudan, or Syria as a journalist for reporting purposes. So if, like the BBC reporter who was recently denied entry into the United States, she would actually have qualified for an exemption. I'm assuming that she got excluded because she had traveled to Iran. I don't know whether or not she has or not, but she was excluded at the airport in London. And she had worked for BBC. But under the waiver, she would qualify for a waiver, but again, there's a procedure for doing that. And you have to do that before you get to the airport. So these waivers apply to a very limited number of people, and it's not going to extend to your ordinary traveler that is going to be impacted by this legislation. I'd like to, hopefully in the discussion part of the presentation, we can look more at why all of the opposition to H.R. 158 failed. There were lots of petitions going around. I saw petitions from NIAC, I saw petitions from PAIA, and they were over and over. And I don't know, like on Facebook, what was coming up there and other things, but it was, I think we need to look at how the organizing for that piece was done. I think one of the things was it started way too late because the organization, the campaign in opposition didn't get off the ground until like December. And this legislation had been introduced 12 months earlier, so there had been time. Also, a lot of the opposition was very like Iranian-centric or Arab-centric. The only Arab thing that I saw was from ADC, a petition from ADC, but the Iranians, when they, like the NIAC petitions and the PAIA petitions, they only talked about Iran. They didn't talk about anything else, really. The other countries, it was very Iran-centric. And I think it's really hard to mobilize people outside the Iranian community behind those kinds of initiatives. So I think it makes sense to try and be as broad as possible in organizing opposition to this. Because what happened after it got signed into, after the Senate signed on, there were 33 Democrats who said, "Oh, we made a mistake. We really didn't mean this." And they were like, there was a lot of maneuvering, or maybe that was in the House. That was in the House. A lot of maneuvering to try and change it before it got to the floor of the Senate. So I think that it just got rushed through. There was a lot of panic and pressure from special interest groups that I mentioned earlier in the presentation to try and overturn the Iran negotiations, etc. So the vote in the House was overwhelming, 407 to 19. And after that is when many Republicans regretted the way they had voted. But it was too late to really do anything. And they tried to make changes in the Senate version, but it didn't work. And President Obama signed it into law the 18th of December. And it was attached to the 2016 government funding legislation. And it's that's a huge piece of legislation. It's stuck in there and went through silently. The NIAC and PAIA approached opposition by trying to distance Iranians from others that were included in the H.R. 158 language. And I'm not really sure why that particular strategy was adopted. And then in regards to the Arabs, I saw limited opposition from the Arab organizations. Perhaps they're not as organized as as NIAC, but the only thing I saw was from ADC, and it was kind of like. And what is also happening now is that this fix that's been introduced that would take away the second part of the provision that applies only to Iranians and Syrians and Iraqis and Sudanese, that's being signed on. People are like so desperate to have changes that they're signing that instead of attacking the whole thing and asking for it to be repealed or something. Initially, the opposition that came out of 75 groups that signed on, and again, PAYA and NIAC joined in that, it was by the ACLU, they called out the whole piece of legislation as a racist piece of legislation, anti-immigrant, racist, on and on. And it was, again, late December. There was not much time to organize around it. So I think I will just end here, and I don't know how you want to do this for a break and then questions, or go right into questions. This does not apply to citizens of the United States or lawful permanent residents of the United States. Okay?
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if you're an American and you traveled to Iran and you come back during that period of time, after March the 1st, 2011. If you come back now, or, you know, if you come back and you've been to Iran after that time, it doesn't apply to you because you don't need a visa to enter the United States. You're a citizen or a lawful permanent resident. You don't need a visa. The question of nationality is left up to the country. Iran is going to decide, but the fact that it says in your passport that you were born in Iran, that's going to exclude you. You know, right now, if you want to go to France, it's still not a problem, okay? But if they decide, yes, we're going to also implement this, then you will no longer be able to use the Visa Waiver Program. They wouldn't consider you an American citizen. They're going to consider you a dual national, and therefore you need to apply for a visa to go to France. So right now there isn't a problem, but I suspect that there may be a problem in the near future if they go ahead and adopt this. But we have to, you know, watch and see if this is going to happen. Because if they do, I think, you know, when it comes down to it, they're mostly going to be looking at people who've traveled since March the 1st, regardless of whether they are dual nationals of Iran. And because, you know, I don't know if you remember, you probably do not, but some people would, the visa, the special registration that applied to, I don't know how many countries, but it was, I want to say 7 countries, and people who were in the United States who were not lawful permanent residents, who were here on non-immigrant visas, had to go to immigration and register.
Every year.
Yes, and they had to turn themselves in and register. The law was eventually abandoned after a year and a half, people going in, different series. They'd call in Algeria and Morocco and this country for this period, Iran, and another country, another period, and everybody was like going in and registering. And it was really, really a racist, horrible program. It lasted for like a year and a half, and there were all kinds of challenges, and it stopped. The same thing would happen if they leave in that section that only applies to dual nationals of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Sudan. Now that it applies to all 38 countries, it's more difficult to attack in the courts. But it may be. But I don't think it will be, because the fix does not address the first provision of the law that applies to anybody from one of the 38 countries. The part that will be taken out, I feel, is the part that applies only to Iranians and Syrians and Sudanese and Iraqis. I don't know if any new countries will be added during the next, I think there's like 30 days left, or I don't know when the 60 days started to run, but hopefully not. But that's where it stands now. And right now, you don't have a problem going to Europe, but you could have. You know, they ask people and at the airport, and you're going to have to apply probably on the ESTA still. You know, you still have to apply with ESTA. And I don't know exactly, since I haven't filled one of those out, if they ask those kinds of questions. You know, the name would be one trigger, even though you would never set foot in Iran. And it doesn't really matter, because according to Iranian law, even if you've never been in Iran and your father is Iranian, you're still Iranian. So it's going to apply, and they're going to use that interpretation, the Iranian interpretation, to enforce the law. I don't see much hope in the courts, okay? And I think that the only way to really repeal it is through congressional efforts, and to come up, you know, to start really doing some lobbying, and to lobby for all the countries, the 38 countries, you know, and to make it a really broad, because you have the one now that's going to take out Iran, the 4 countries, okay, and that could be enhanced by adding all the countries. You know, this is because they have lots of other ways of telling about, I mean, if they're focusing on travel after March the 1st of 2011, they're looking for something specific. So they must have other ways. You know, I'm sure the security apparatus is set up to do that. I mean, this was, I think it has to be exposed that what was the motivation behind this? This was not national security. It didn't start out as national security. There was another political motivation behind it. And I think that if we can really try and explain that and get, you know, congressional people involved in that, and see that it's not really a national security issue, that it's more of a political issue. And that is the challenge, because the whole nation is being driven by national security concerns. Immigration policies, immigration laws, it's driven by national security concerns, instead of, like, you know, political realities and concerns. So I think that it really takes, the only way to change this is in the Congress. And this current fix, I'm really bothered by it, because it's not broad enough, and it just addresses the 4 countries, but it leaves in place, you know, the 38 countries, including those 4 countries, and has this arbitrary date of March the 1st, 2011. And if you're looking at Iran in particular, Iran hasn't done that, I mean, it's done a lot of things since March the 1st, 2011, but not any worse than it was doing before that time either, you know what I mean? So I'm not really sure what this March the 1st, 2011 arbitrary cutoff date is. So the whole thing was motivated by something other than national security concerns. And that's what it's really important to try and unpack that piece and get behind legislation. You know, put a group together and meet with your congressperson and say, look, this is not the reality. It didn't have anything really to do with Paris or San Bernardino. It goes further back than that. You know, I really think that legal challenges will be difficult. I mean, in challenging the second provision, those are good challenges, but now they have the fix that's probably going to go through, and it'll leave in place the more difficult one to challenge. because you'd be challenging the whole Visa Waiver Program, which is a racist program anyway. But they're not ready to really take that issue on. There is some room here, in terms of like legislation again, because the main thing that's, that is what the European countries, and the U.S. of course, but mostly the European countries, really now that the secondary sanctions have been lifted and, sanctions with regard to the U.S. in some cases have been lifted, people want to do business with Iran. Yeah. So this is where it's going to be that, it's a real inconvenience now, because the people that want to go, cannot travel freely. And so this is the only hope, is that because of all this international commerce, that there will be some changes with regard to that. Because it's not really about national security. That's what I keep saying. It's about the motivating the people that were behind this when that Candace Miller first started introducing this thing. She's just so anti-immigration and so, anti-anything improvement of relations with Iran. Yeah, they say that they're going to give 10-year multiple entry visas.
10-year multiple entry.
Yeah, that's what the word is. They're also supposed to expedite this processing.
Okay.
And it's going to be a 10-year multiple entry for Iranian nationals, Iranian dual nationals as well.
Okay. That's
so
the same for everyone.
Yeah, for everyone.
Yeah.
And that would be a good thing. We have not seen multiple entry visas for Iranians since, what, 1979. The only exception was the student visas, where, it's like a multiple entry for 2 years was recently given, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But multiple entry visas have not existed for almost 30 years, I think. One question came up, and this one is really interesting, and I'm going to put it out there. How would they know that you went to Iran? Say, people know that you cannot enter Iran with your American passport if you're an Iranian national. Everyone in this room has gone to Iran, and if you're an Iranian national, you have to get an Iranian passport to enter Iran. Now, how is anybody going to know that you actually went there? So that you would be, have this problem with the March date and all. Well, the systems are very sophisticated, and they will know that, we'll make a fictitious person, Fatima Tehrani, entered Germany with an American passport on May the 1st. Of 2015, and allegedly was in Germany from May the 1st, 2015 until, say, July the 1st, 2015. Then they're going to see that they're going to run the names. Fatima Tehrani's date of birth, this and this, with this different things, biometric stuff. And they'll see that that same person entered from Iran on an Iranian passport, also entered Frankfurt during this same period of time. So they can check the names and see that this same person went to Iran. So right there they're going to know. And they may also say, well, could you please give me your itinerary? If you were here in Germany from May the 1st to July the 1st, what were you doing? Where were you? Stuff like that. But they'll also check the names. This is happening a lot in naturalization. For a long time, people used to fudge the dates on the naturalization. I went to Iran during the last 5 years, but you might have been out of the country, and people would make up all kinds of dates and fill it in. Unfortunately, now that does not work anymore. They know when you entered the country. The passports have different mechanisms, and they'll pull out, and I've seen it. People USCIS during an interview, they'll pull out the list and show that there's all these entries that you made when you were not supposed to have left the country in the last 5 years or whatever. Well, you said you didn't go anyplace, but look, here it is. So they do have mechanisms, and these are not, you know, that even though there was sanctions and this and that and the other, all of this international travel stuff was exempt from the sanctions. Again, national security, blah, blah, blah. You know, the way they look at it, the courts have, I think, historically looked at that these are privileges to enter a country. It's not a right. So, Panta, you might weigh in on this. But, you know, travel, visas, these are privileges, not necessarily construed as rights. So, yes, of course it's discriminatory. If, you know, why didn't some countries, the African and Arab countries and Latin American countries that are not entitled to use the visa waiver, why haven't they raised this? Because it wouldn't go anywhere, you know. These are privileges enacted by these states to a certain privileged group of people. These were the cream of the crop, you know, people were not suspected of coming here to work and stay. They were just coming for travel, for visits, for things. So it is a privileged class of people, and not, you know, there's a distinction between rights and, you know, a privilege. At least that's the way it's construed. Yeah, I think that, you know, I think that H.R. 158, when it was introduced, was motivated by those considerations. You know, we want to make it, increase the tensions, you know, increase the tensions. That was one of the factors behind it, and not the national security. The big fear is the reciprocation. But, you know, maybe I'm just being optimistic. I don't know, but, well, certainly Germany would be inclined to do it, and perhaps France as well, to implement it. But if they do it, everybody's going to do it. So the whole European Union will do it. So, you know, there is that fear. And that's why the legislation needs to be struck down in the U.S., needs to be repealed in the U.S. It was a total disaster, a total, you know, they rammed it through Congress in such haste. And none of the Beltway organizations drew anyone's attention to it until December. I'd never heard of it till, you know, started getting all the emails and stuff. Never even heard about it, but it was there.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you so much.